So I'm really into books, clearly, as I already told you before. There's another book that I was really inspired by called Some Turtles Have Nice Shells. It's another old photo book that has pictures of house trucks that were built back in the 60s and 70s. So a lot of my design ideas were actually just taken from that book because there's a lot of design constrictions that you have when you're building on a vehicle.
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and today's episode features an incredible guest. Joining me is Kai, who's not only living in a homemade house truck, but has a wealth of knowledge about the ins and outs of this unique lifestyle. We'll explore Kai's journey from finding and customizing a commercial truck to navigating the practical challenges of living in her unique tiny home. Kai will share her experiences with insulation, maintenance, and the daily joys and hardships of the tiny life. Get ready to be inspired and informed by Kai's fascinating insights into the world of house trucks and the tiny house movement. And instead of our usual sponsored ad read, I just wanted to come on and say Happy New Year. Thank you so much for being a listener of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast. Whether you started listening recently or you've been with us for 5 years, I hope the show brings you lots of value and has helped to inspire you and helped to move you along on your tiny house journey. Things have been quiet from me. I don't think I've sent a newsletter even in a couple of months. I've been actually really busy renovating a not so tiny home that my wife and I bought at the beginning of October. And I haven't done any real construction since I built my tiny house in 2012. And let me tell you, renovation is really difficult. I feel like I have barely enough time for anything. We're certainly saving a lot of money by having me do the work myself, but wow, it's a lot different than building a new house. I'd love to tell you more about it, so stay tuned to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast and make sure you are signed up to our newsletter. You can do that at thetinyhouse.net/newsletter so you can get all the updates whenever I send them. All right, let's get on with the show. All right, I am here with Kai. Kai lives in a self-built house truck in the mountains of British Columbia with her partner, Ben. She has a passion for small, simple living and has become very successful on social media, chronicling her life and various build projects. Kai, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So tell us the name of your house and then just tell us about it. Like what kind of the specs of your tiny home.
Yeah, for sure. So I live in a house truck. It is approximately 8 feet wide by about 32 feet long. And I built it myself up in BC. Other than that, I'm really passionate about house trucks and tiny houses and small, simple living and stuff like that, which I'm sure that your viewers are all very familiar with.
Yeah.
I've been on Instagram for, I think, about 6 years now, and I've been on TikTok for the last 2 years, roughly since the pandemic. And yeah, that's all I can think of.
Nice. So your truck is called the Ugly Truckling, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's right. That was the question. Yeah, it's called The Ugly Truckling, which is a play on the old fairy tale about the ugly duckling that grows up to be a swan, which I've always quite enjoyed.
It's great. Yeah, it's a perfect name because it's a very whimsical design. Like it's got the cedar shingles and that kind of dragon tooth pattern and a round window. Tell me about the design. Did you kind of sketch it out before you started building, or did you just kind of get started and see where it took you?
Yeah, so I sketched it out for years before I ever started building it. I have sketchbooks that are just full of like drawings of different design ideas and stuff like that.
Wow.
But I can say that I got most of my design ideas actually from a photo book called Builders of the Pacific Coast, which is published by Shelter Publications out of California. The author of that book, Lloyd Kahn, is a personal hero of mine, and he went on a road trip around BC and he took photos and did interviews of kind of old school builders who have been living off-grid in the woods in coastal British Columbia. And so that book was really pivotal for me because I've always been really into architecture, and I've never been able to put a finger on the architecture of the place that I'm from, but I would call it kind of like BC coastal folk architecture in a way where people use similar
Okay.
materials because there's only certain materials that are available to you. So there's lots of hand split cedar
Hmm.
shakes, rough shingles, driftwood, organic
Hmm.
shapes, kind of found material objects, beach combed
Hmm.
items and stuff like that. And most of the people who built these houses built them on a shoestring budget back in the 70s with whatever they could find. And so I was really inspired by that book. And so when it came to designing my own house truck, I kind of wanted to follow in their footsteps and build a house truck that looks similar to a lot of those cabins and things that I'd seen in that book.
So one interesting thing about your truck is that it's not like you took an existing vehicle, like a school bus, for example, and just used the structure, the walls, the ceiling of the school bus to as the walls and ceiling of your house. It's, correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like the truck was essentially a flatbed or just like kind of a cab with a big kind of space that you could build whatever you wanted on top of it. Is that, am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I bought the truck as just a cab chassis. So that's just the cab of the truck
Okay.
and then the frame rails and then the rear axle. There wasn't even a flat deck on it. So I actually ended up designing and getting a welder to fabricate a custom flat deck for it and to extend the back of the truck to make it a little bit longer, and then built from there. And that was really nice because it gave me a completely blank slate to build whatever I wanted.
Interesting.
Within obviously like highway requirements for height and width and stuff like that. And like, which I think is great, but it also presents like a lot of challenges because you don't have this existing structure to build off of.
Yeah.
Because with a school bus, you can just insulate it and then put a couch in there and start living. With the house truck, it was quite a long process to even get to the point of having just a roof over my head.
Right. Just to get it to the point where you could start building a simple structure on top of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So after the years of sketching and all the different designs, what are some of the features of this design and why did you choose it?
Right. Well, I was also, so I'm really into books, clearly, as I already told you before. But there's another book that I was really inspired by called Some Turtles Have Nice Shells. And it's another old photo book that has pictures of house trucks that were built back in the 60s and 70s through the 80s and so on and so forth. So a lot of my design ideas were actually just taken from that book because there's a lot of like design constrictions that you have when you're building on a vehicle, especially things like wheel wells and where to place things and stuff like that. So I had to take into consideration of where the wheel wells are. So I had to place cabinets over those.
Yep.
Where the entrances were and stuff like that. So I didn't try to do anything too crazy. And I kind of just looked at things that other people had done before me and took all the different ideas that I liked out of that book and then combined them in my own build.
Yep. Nice. And your chassis flatbed, or cab and chassis, that's what it's called. What life did it live before you built a house on it?
Yeah, so the guy that I bought it from said it used to be a linen delivery truck.
Okay.
And I learned an interesting thing when I was truck shopping. So it took me about a year to find the truck that I ended up with.
Okay.
Is that old commercial trucks aren't really worth very much after they've kind of lived out their useful life. So my truck is a 1992, so it's already 30 years old. And big industrial trucks like that, like they are broken up into kind of three components. There's the truck body itself, there's the box that's on the back of it, and then there's the lift gate. So out of the three of those things, they're all priced differently. So normally lift gates will go from like $5,000 to $10,000, kind of depending how big they are and how much weight they can lift. And then the box itself, whether that's insulated, whether it's a reefer truck, like a refrigerated truck, or anything along those lines. And so then the box is like $5,000 to $7,000, and then the truck itself isn't really worth that much after they've removed the box and the lift gate. So I could get the truck for $4,000. I spent less on a huge commercial truck than I would have spent on a trailer to build a tiny house or on a school bus or something along those lines. So that allowed me to save a lot of money, which was great. And yeah, I think that having a truck is a great platform for building a tiny house on the back of, kind of like I've done, because I know that tiny house trailers can be quite expensive.
Yes, they absolutely can. And then you still need something to pull them with.
Yeah. And then you still need a truck to tow your trailer with.
Yeah. So how often do you move the ugly truckling, and have you had any, trouble keeping it running, mechanical issues?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So my partner and I have lived in the truck in a couple of different locations. there was the original build site, and then it moved to a farm kind of in the area that we live in now, and then we moved to another farm, and we've also used it to evacuate from forest fires a couple of times, which is pretty good.
Oh, wow.
So I try to keep the truck in pretty good condition, but obviously because it does sit for a couple of years in between uses, so there's a lot of things that get rusty, they need maintenance, they need greasing and stuff along those lines.
Yep.
But every summer I try to do like a set of routine maintenance to make sure that it's ready to go in case we do get a forest fire in the area.
Did you have any experience with being a mechanic before you bought the truck?
No, definitely not. Well, especially not heavy diesel mechanics is a totally whole other ballpark. I've definitely worked on my own vehicles before, like just done simple things like oil changes and stuff like that. But the scope and scale of the house truck, I had never done anything like that before.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a big, I mean, I'm going to say it's a big house, and I'm kind of laughing when I say it, but it's a substantial sized cabin. And then you've got this truck that's also like quite robust, and you have to keep that thing going. I see that a lot in the schooly world as well, is that like you essentially become a heavy diesel mechanic if you want to live in a school bus for any amount of time.
Yes, definitely. I think that you have to be ready to get your hands dirty if you're going to be living in a school bus or living in a vehicle of that size, and in a way that you don't necessarily have to if you have just a tiny house on a trailer. Yeah. Because your vehicle is detachable. But then at the same time, like to get access to a pickup truck that's big enough to tow a 26-foot long tiny house, like that can be quite intimidating as well for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like you're a real advocate for a house truck over, your typical tiny house on a trailer. Were there any other factors that led you to do the house truck versus the tiny house on wheels? Yeah,
I mean, I'm not sure what it's like in the States. I'm assuming that you're in the States, but I live in BC, British Columbia, in Canada. And so like the legal progress made towards legalizing tiny homes is really, really slow up here. And it used to be that you could buy a trailer and then build a tiny house on it and class it as an RV, and you could get RV insurance, but they don't actually even allow that anymore.
Oh, okay.
So I don't even know how you class a tiny house these days, or if you can get insurance for it or anything along those lines. But if you build a house on a vehicle, like if you build a school bus and convert it to being an RV, there is an inspection process that you can go through where you take it to get inspected. And I think you need 5 out of 7 things, like utilities or something, to be installed in it in order for them to be able to reclass it from a commercial vehicle to an RV. And then once it's classed as an RV, you can get just regular RV insurance, and legally they just treat it like an RV.
Oh, nice. So is yours classed as an RV now?
No, it's still classed as a commercial vehicle.
Okay.
There's a few more systems that I need to install first before I take it to get inspected.
Okay. And so, but are you planning to take it?
Yeah,
to get inspected? You're going to do it?
That's the goal eventually, is that I want to get it inspected as an RV so I can get RV plates.
Yep.
And then I would just be able to take it wherever I wanted, in theory.
Yeah. So like as it is now, is there some risk that you wouldn't be allowed to live in it or something because it's not classed as an RV?
Yeah, because currently it's classed as a commercial vehicle, and when I take it on the road, I get temporary insurance for it as a commercial vehicle with a load, like a loaded commercial truck, and then you can stipulate how much the load is worth on the back of the truck that you're moving.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So it's
this whole. I can see therein lies the problem. Yeah.
Our insurance system is it's run by the state, and it's kind of strange.
Yeah. All right. Well, at least there's an easy path to doing it. It sounds like, that's one positive thing, that there is actually a path to getting it.
Yeah, exactly.
Classed as an RV.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas I feel like if you had a tiny house and you were trying to get it classed as an RV right now, I just don't think it's even possible. I honestly don't know. Like, I know in the States, in some places, you can have a tiny house as legally as long as you take the axles off of it and then attach it permanently to a foundation or something along those lines. I think I remember hearing about that. But it's just completely different in Canada.
Yeah. So I'm curious to learn about kind of your lifestyle. I know you've mentioned that you've lived in a couple different places, but tell us about like where you're currently parked, what amenities are there? Like, are there other people around, or are you just like, you've driven the truck out into the woods and there you are?
Sure. Well, I'm not going to say, I generally don't say exactly where I live just for security reasons.
Sure.
But I will say that I live in a very rural area that is about 35 kilometers away from the nearest town.
Wow.
So it's kind of like a remote rural agricultural area. So there are lots of large farms around me. So there are people in the vicinity.
Okay.
I think that people who have maybe watched my videos have this assumption that I just drove into the mountains and just parked it somewhere, which isn't the case. Like I am way up in the mountains and stuff like that, but I'm parked on somebody's private land, and I do pay that person in order to be able to park there every month.
Okay. Nice. And then in terms of like hookups, water, electricity, what do you have there?
Yeah. So there's well water on the property. So I get water from the well that's on the property already. And then I do get power from the landowner's barn. So he has a electrical line that runs out from the barn, and then I can plug into that. But I also have a battery bank on the house truck. So I have like kind of your standard charger inverter that charges a 12-volt electrical battery bank, and then that charges all of the 12-volt lighting inside the house. But then also if there's a power outage or if I need to unplug and drive away, the system automatically switches over to the batteries, and then in which case that we can self-power them, and we can charge the batteries through anything, whether it's the landline, like the short power that I've got right now, or solar panels or a generator or kind of anything along those lines.
Very cool. Is that like a home built system, or is that like a commercially available battery system?
No, it's a home built system.
Cool.
My partner, he is an electrician, and he got everything set up, which is great. I really appreciate him.
Good person to know. So what about heat? I see wood stove content on the Instagram. So is that your primary source of heat?
Yeah. We've got a little wood stove. It's the dwarf 4-kilowatt wood stove from tinywoodstoves.com.
Okay.
And I purchased it, and then I had it shipped to a vitreous enameling factory, which was somewhere in the American Midwest. I can't remember where it was exactly, but one of the only places that still does vitreous enameling in America. And then they enameled it this like beautiful shiny green, kind of British racing green color, and then shipped it back up to me in Canada. And the wood stove is great. I love that thing. The only limitation is that it can only take 8 to 10 inch pieces of wood. But I think it's a good compromise between some of the smaller wood stoves, like the Grizzly or something, where you can only put 6-inch pieces of wood in, and then a larger one, which would just take up, more space than a tiny house has to give. Yeah, it's great. No complaints.
So vitreous enameling, is that just an aesthetic thing that you chose to do, or is there like, does that enhance the wood stove in some way?
Yeah, well, it's it's an alternative coating to stove black or painting or something along those lines. So it's just a very, very hard wearing, shiny surface that cannot chip, and you can wipe clean and it'll stay on there like forever, basically. Whereas stove black, you have to reapply every couple of years in order to season it. And then paint has the potential to chip.
Right. Okay.
And then also it's just a much more old-fashioned kind of look, where if you see kind of like Swedish wood stoves from around 1900, a lot of them were enameled, so they had this like shiny, beautiful look to them. But it's kind of hard to find stoves that look like that these days.
Yep. Yeah. And then if you do find one that's that old, it's probably not necessarily the most efficient stove that you can burn.
Probably not super safe.
No. So you've got the house truck, and it looks like you kind of plant that somewhere for like a couple of years. Whoa, I have no idea why there are balloons just floating over my video, but okay. You plant that, you plant your house truck, and do you also have like a van that you've built out?
Yes, I do.
For travel?
Yeah, so I have, that's another common question that I get, where people see the house truck and they think, oh, do you take that to go get groceries? And no, I've got like a smaller little minivan that I've also converted. It's got a bed in the back and a little diesel heater and a really basic water and electrical system.
Yep.
And I use that to go on quick road trips, visit family, or if I get called away to go do a job or something like that, I can live in that while I'm
Yep.
doing the job if that's like out of my town.
Yeah. So tell me, I'm very curious about diesel heaters. I've been kind of it always perks my ears up when I hear about people using them, because I think it's a very interesting, or just a readily available fuel and an easy way to add heat to a small space. I'm guessing the van though runs on gasoline, right?
Yes. So it has, so most diesel heaters, depending what brand you get, because there's like the big German ones like
Yeah.
Webasto and stuff like that. And then there's the
Yep.
less expensive ones that are made in China. A lot of them come shipped
Yep.
with a tank, like a separate diesel tank. So you can choose to install that diesel
Yep.
tank separately. Or if you have a diesel engine powered vehicle already, you can just tap the fuel tank that your vehicle already has.
Yep.
And it'll just
Yep.
sip diesel out of your regular fuel tank. But if you don't
Yep.
have that, then you need to install it somewhere in your van.
Okay. So yeah, and so that's what you've done. You basically have a small diesel tank auxiliary in your van.
Yeah, exactly. And then you just top that up whenever you need it. And the heater uses nothing. It's super efficient, which is great.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've considered it as an alternative. Like in my tiny house, I'm kind of tied to propane, which I don't love. I mean, I guess diesel is also, a fossil fuel as well, but propane comes in tanks that are heavy and difficult to transport. And, so I've always liked having multiple sources of heat.
Mm-hmm.
And, a diesel heater has always appealed to me because like you can run to the, I guess where I am, there's a gas station probably a mile away that has diesel. So you could fill up a tank of diesel and just keep your tiny house warm through a power outage or through whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I like having multiple forms of heat as well. I think that just kind of like diversifies things so that if one thing isn't available for whatever reason, you can go out and just use the other, which is great. The other nice thing is that because the diesel heater, like the way it works is there's the tank, a little fuel pump, and that pumps diesel into an ignition chamber. The ignition chamber sucks fresh air in from outside through the ignition chamber, mixes with the diesel, spark, compression, explosion, heat. It exhausts outside.
Yeah.
And then there's a heat exchanger inside the diesel heater. So the explosion and the heat is on one side of the heat exchanger, and then the warm air is being blown across these fins on the other side. So none of that exhaust gas and none of that ignition gas goes inside of your home, basically. Whereas a lot of propane heaters, they just burn propane inside your home. So all of the fumes from that are still inside. Whereas most diesel heaters, it's a heat exchanger. So you're just having hot air blown in, and all of that ignition gas and nastiness just gets exhausted outside. So they're a lot safer as well.
So the heater itself is mounted outside of the truck then, that appliance part of it?
It can be, but in my van, I have it mounted inside just because I didn't have anywhere to put it outside. But it has its own, like it has a fresh air intake, which goes outside the vehicle. And then it has an exhaust, which also goes outside the vehicle. And then inside, it sucks cold air through one side and then blows hot air out the other side.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Would you ever consider installing one in the truckling?
Yeah, I've definitely thought about it for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
because wood stove, I'm sure with especially, or go ahead.
Oh, I've definitely thought about it also because the house truck is a diesel engine. So I already have like a huge amount of diesel in the tanks just sitting there. So it would be nice. It would be nice to be able to just run a heater off of that.
Yeah, certainly. How many gallons or how many liters does the truck hold?
Oh boy, a lot. It actually has 2 diesel tanks, so I'm not sure what the volume of them combined is, but I think maybe.
Oh my gosh.
Like at least 100 to 200 gallons, something like that. It's huge.
Oh, wow. So when you go to fill it up, it's like, ouch.
Oh yeah. I think
major expense.
It's $300 or $400, I think, to fill up the tanks completely. I think I filled them up completely maybe once. And yeah, it was ouch for sure.
Ouch. Yeah. Yeah. So what kind of chores do you have at the house? Like what's your day-to-day lifestyle like?
Right. So lots of chopping firewood, as I've made quite a few videos about. So lots of chopping, processing wood, cutting, kindling, stuff like that. Getting up to start the fire first thing in the morning to warm the house up. in the summertime, I have a little veggie garden in the area, so I have to make sure to irrigate that and weed it and so on and so forth and maintain it and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then also on the property I'm on right now, I've been given permission to build kind of a little lean-to shed in at one area. So
Okay.
I've got my little woodworking shop in there as well. So most of the time
Nice.
I'll go up there and I'll be working on various different woodworking projects, either for the house truck itself,
Very nice.
because it's not quite finished yet. So I'm still working on like some cabinets and
Okay.
stuff, or I'll do projects for other people.
Nice.
Yeah.
So do you now do carpentry as like professionally?
I wouldn't say professionally, but I definitely have done paid projects in the past.
That's professional.
Sure. I'm working on it. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah, if you get paid to do something, then it's professional, at least in my mind.
That's true.
So or go ahead.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask, you've got, a big following on social media. Is Instagram kind of your biggest platform?
No, I think that TikTok is my biggest platform. Although the Instagram is doing pretty well as well.
Nice. I have to admit that I feel too old for TikTok, or like I don't use TikTok. My wife does a lot of TikToking, but so is that, are you able to like support yourself from social media, or do you do other work?
No, I do other work outside. So this is actually really interesting, and this is a thing that a lot of people don't know, is that Canadians actually can't get paid from TikTok directly. So like in the States, you get paid per view. And that it kind of varies depending on what niche you're in. But there's a lot of people on TikTok that make their entire living off of it. But unfortunately, Canada is one of the few countries that don't have a creativity program for their creators. So the only way I get paid through TikTok is when I have sponsorships that are directly from companies that hire me to review their products and then make a video and post it on TikTok. So I get a little bit of money from that, which is great. I do maybe one sponsorship a month, something along those lines. But I don't actually make any money directly from TikTok.
Bummer.
And then Instagram is kind of the same. Like you don't really get paid per views on Instagram either. One of the only ways for a Canadian to just make money off of social media is to do YouTube, which I've just started a YouTube channel as well. And I'm hoping to do more long format videos over there in the future.
Awesome. All right. Well, your content is really fun. I've looked at the Instagram stuff, and just the videos are short and just like informative, and you have a great sense of humor and answer a lot of good questions.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So, when we were setting up the interview, you kind of mentioned like, hey, I don't have internet access where I am. So where do you go when you need to do something like this?
So I've only ever done, actually, no, I've done 2 other podcast interviews before, and normally I have to go into town.
Okay.
Because I do have internet at home. I actually just got Starlink, which is great. Starlink is much faster than the previous internet service I had, but it still cuts out. It still cuts out about every 5 minutes or so. I don't know. I think the satellites just fly behind a tree or something like that. But so it makes it really difficult to do kind of like phone calls or video chats or something like that. So I'll generally have to like jump in my van and bring my laptop and then drive all the way into town and find like Wi-Fi or cell service or something like that in order to do like long interviews and stuff like that.
Got it. And so how many years have you been in the truckling? Sorry, I should know this.
I think it's been 5 years now.
Nice. That's like long enough that whatever honeymoon period you might have had has long worn off, and you're just kind of doing it day to day. Is there anything that you would do differently if you ever built another one? And are you planning to kind of do another house truck, or is the truckling like your ride or die?
Well, I mean, I'd love to build more house trucks. I think it's a lot of fun, and I've got so many ideas that I want to try out in future builds.
Yep.
I don't think I would build another one for myself, maybe, but I'd love to build them for other people. And we actually have a project coming up where my partner and I bought a 1965 old Dodge school bus.
Ooh.
And our plan is to renovate it and get it running, and then hopefully list it for sale in the next year or so.
Very cool.
Which is going to be really exciting. The bus actually was already converted. I think someone converted it maybe back in the 70s or something like that, because the whole interior is like very vintage and beautiful. but the engine doesn't run and the transmission doesn't run and the steering doesn't work and the brakes don't work. Nothing works. So it's going to be a major project.
That sounds like a project.
Oh, yeah.
I suppose you could just tow it to places.
That's true. That's one of my friends suggested that. He was like, why don't you just put a trailer hitch on the front and then you can move it around like it's a tiny house? I was like, well, I mean, that's an idea for sure.
I'm guessing the truckling could probably tow it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. That would be something.
I had the idea at one point in time where I was like, I wonder if I got a trailer, I could build an art studio and then I could hitch it to the back of the house truck. And then I could just go down the highway like a 70-foot long road train with all of my stuff all hitched up to it. But then I thought, maybe not.
So that sounds amazing. I'm sure that if you do it, you will post it on Instagram or TikTok. So, you were actually featured. You kind of buried the lead when you were talking about Lloyd Kahn. You were featured in his recent book on rolling homes, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, I was featured in his most recent book, Rolling Homes, which I was really honored to be included in that.
That is a huge honor. I'm a big Lloyd Kahn fan myself. So did he come and like see the truck in person?
No, he didn't, unfortunately. I think that I think his more recent books are more like viewer sent in images and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't think think Lloyd has actually done the principal photography in his books for a couple of years now.
Okay.
But I did have the pleasure of meeting him once before when he did the book tour for his Builders of the Pacific Coast book. So I traveled to a small island here where he was doing a book reading to an audience. And I went there and watched it and got to meet him and got him to sign my copy of the book back then, which was great. And I also got an opportunity to meet some of the builders that were featured in that book. So that was really fun.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. With the first time I had Lloyd on my podcast, like a month later, I got a box in the mail from his publishing company and he sent me every single tiny house book that they had published. I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah, that's great.
Full Lloyd Kahn library.
There you go. You got the whole Shelter Pub library all in one go.
I do. Well, actually, I need to pick up the latest, the Rolling Homes one. I don't have that yet.
Oh, there you go.
But the last one was awesome too, which was all about like his homestead and essentially like his lifestyle.
Yeah. I think that's cool because he's been telling other people's stories for about, 60 years. So then finally that was a book where he just gets to tell his own story.
Exactly. Well, you mentioned two books that inspired you, Builders of the Pacific Northwest and also Every Turtle.
Some turtles have nice shells.
Some turtles have nice shells. Are there any other books or resources that you kind of credit with helping you on your tiny house journey that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think I'm proud to say that I have maybe one of the most extensive libraries on house trucks anywhere. So I've got a really big collection of both vintage house truck books as well as modern ones. So there's the Rolling Homes book that Shelter Publications put out, but there's also the first Rolling Homes book that was published by Jane Lids, I think in 1979.
Okay.
So that one's out of print. There's Some Turtles Have Nice Shells, which is also out of print. There's another book called Roll Your Own, which is kind of supposed to be like a instructional DIY book, but it's mostly just filled with fun illustrations and kind of funny lingo from back in those days. I wouldn't say that it's a very like practical for these days DIY book, but it's nice to have just as a part of history. Okay. And then there's another book that is about New Zealand house truckers. Actually, I think it's Road People of Aotearoa is a more modern book, but that one actually talks about the house truckers and the Gypsy Fair and all of these cultural things that happened in New Zealand from the 70s onwards. So that's one of the things I find the most interesting is that house trucks have been around in multiple countries and on multiple continents since the 60s, but a lot of people seem to not really know about them.
Yeah, they seem like a kind of a niche niche within a niche.
Yeah, a niche within a niche of,
but very recognizable.
Within the tiny house kind of umbrella, there's, van life and schoolies and tiny houses and everybody else. And then there's house trucks, which are just right kind of off in this corner over here that like nobody really knows about.
Yeah. Well, it's a really interesting concept because, again, like if you live in a cold climate, I would be concerned about just taking that school bus or that van and trying to turn it into something that can be heated without dealing with moisture issues and the like. So to basically get the movability of the schoolie without, if you're going to have to essentially build an entire house on top of it anyway, you might as well just build the entire house from scratch rather than trying to use this metal tube.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. It's like, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love schoolies. I think to make them livable in most northern climates, you need to do a roof raise, which is a whole other thing entirely. Lots of cutting and welding and lots of metal fabrication, which is beyond a lot of people, just in order to be able to get that head height so that you can then insulate it significantly.
Yep.
So house trucks are nice in that way because you just build it up like you would kind of a tiny house on the back of a platform. But then you have a tiny house that you can move really, really easily. And you're not towing a trailer and dealing with, jackknifing a trailer into weird little parking spots and stuff like that.
Yep. Yep. Have you ever gotten the truckling stuck?
Yes, I have. I can't remember what I was doing, but I think I was trying to maneuver it into a really weird parking spot in one of the previous places that I lived, and ended up spinning one of the rear tires, so it kind of dug itself in because it was just gravel. It was dirt and gravel, it wasn't paved. And so I dug one of the rear tires in, and the whole house just started to tilt over slowly. And I was like, oh God, okay, I have to go get help. So I found a buddy who had a tow strap in his big F-250 or something like that. And between the two of us, we had to coordinate it so that he pulled and jerked the tow rope at the exact same time that I kicked it into reverse. And then we managed to bump it out of that hole and get it up and out.
Oh boy.
Yeah, that was fun.
Wow. Well, hopefully you don't repeat that one again.
I definitely hope so. Yeah, it's not it can drive around farmers' fields and stuff as long as it's dry out, but it's definitely not an off-road vehicle for sure.
Yeah. It sounds like it's rear wheel drive.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it could get stuck quite easily, but yeah, but I do enjoy, I watch a lot of videos of people who build those overlanders. I don't know if you've seen those. The great big,
oh yes,
the huge 4x4, 6x6, like man truck overlanders.
Yep.
I do think those are pretty cool.
Yes, they talk about mechanical nightmare though.
Oh man, yeah, no kidding.
I think I'm forgetting their names, but I interviewed a couple that their overlander is like a decommissioned like military vehicle, and like literally nobody can work on them, or like it's not even easy to get parts for them. It's like very specialized.
Yes, that
seems impractical.
That's the thing with
those. Really
cool.
Cool.
Or you need like some special German part that you need to import, and then you need to wait 8 weeks for it to show up, and all of this kind of stuff. So I guess that's the trade-off of having something along those something like that, or a Unimog or something like that.
Yeah.
And one of the motivations for the truck that I bought specifically is that it's just an old International. It's one of the most common commercial trucks that run the roads in North America. So you can find parts for them literally anywhere. You can find mechanics to work on them anywhere. It's really, really simple. It's not air brakes, it's hydraulic brakes. So, I definitely, it's funny, whenever I post a video talking about the truck itself, I always get people in the comments saying like, I used to work on these back in blah, 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 or something. So just like every single diesel mechanic has worked on one of these trucks at some point in time, which is great because that's what I wanted. Right. I wanted it to be easy to fix if I was stuck out in the middle of nowhere and I needed to get a part for it.
Smart. Well, that's a great little tidbit and tip for people who are maybe interested in house trucks to try to find something that's a little bit more common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Rather than some specialty, I don't know, Swedish military vehicle or something like that.
You can make the house really unique, but you want the truck to be really, really common.
Totally. Yeah, 100%.
Did you ever consider like buying a school bus and then just demolishing the cab? Or is that like way too much work?
No, I totally thought about that. There's there's a couple people in those old books that I mentioned who did exactly that, where they had a school bus, and then you can see they took like a can opener to the whole back of it and just took the whole thing off and then reframed it, and then just reframed it from the bottom up. And some people have definitely done that.
Wow.
I was not confident in my metalworking abilities at the time.
Yeah.
So I did not do that.
That seems like a big deal.
It would be really nice to do something like that, because then you would have the full length, like, because you'd have the pass through all the way to the front of the cab to have more interior space. So like that would be really nice. But then you also deal with the difficulties of trying to insulate that space, where windshield is single pane glass, the passenger and the driver's side doors are both single pane glass, and generally the cab of a truck is kind of chilly because of all the sheet metal and stuff. So then that would be a thermal leach that would go to the back of your house. So then that would be kind of like a whole other problem to deal with.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. Nice. Well, and actually I meant to ask, just, because you are in BC in the mountains, you see snow and freezing temperatures. How did you insulate your home, and are you happy with how it's kind of performed?
Yeah, for sure. So I used rock wool insulation in the whole house, in the house portion.
Nice.
And I did that because it's pretty easy to work with. It's locally produced through like mines within my province and stuff. It's pretty affordable.
Yep.
I think that if I had kind of a more concrete idea of where I definitely wanted to put absolutely everything, like if I had planned everything down to the most minute detail, I would have used spray foam instead, just because that works as a vapor barrier and an insulator. And it is, even if you're the most meticulous person in the world, you'll never be able to insulate with batt insulation as well as spray foam will. But there were a few things I wasn't quite sure of. I wasn't 100% certain where I wanted to put certain electrical outlets and stuff. So I didn't want to risk spray foaming the whole thing and then having to go back and chisel out, cooked spray foam in order to put an electrical outlet somewhere. So that's kind of a that's kind of a trade-off,
Yeah, totally.
And then in the floor, one thing I wish I had done is what's common in school buses is you've got the flat deck, which is all sheet metal, and then they'll put expanded foam sheeting on top of that, and then they'll just put their plywood directly on top of the sheeting so that you don't have any thermal bridging in between the top of the plywood and the metal floor, and that creates a really good insulative platform to build on. I didn't want to do that on the inside because I was worried about losing head height. So instead what I did is I went underneath the truck and then got rigid foam board, cut it, and then jammed it up in between the floor joists. And that that hasn't really worked very well. And I've also realized that the mice love going underneath the frame rails of the truck and then finding a way to squeeze their way up on top of the foam board and then building a nest right there, like directly under my floorboards. So I've had a few instances where there's been a little mouse nest and he's running around like right underneath the floor, and my cat is quite interested in what's going on, but the mouse is like underneath the floorboards on the outside of the truck.
Oh my gosh.
So I've had to deal with all that. It's funny. I was listening to one of your previous podcasts where you talk about mouse problems, and
oh man, I had a major mouse issue at my house.
It's a thing.
Yeah. It is a thing. They will come. They will find the holes and make a nest.
They absolutely will. Your house is warm and cozy. That's what they want.
Yeah. That's what they want. All right. Well, Kai, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much to Kai for being a guest on the show today. You can find the complete show notes, including a transcript, photos of Kai's house truck, the ugly truckling, and so much more over at thetinyhouse.net/288. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/288. Well, that's all for this week. Happy 2024. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and I'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast.